The inhabitants of the island in AD 60 would have been made up of the survivors of the recently subdued tribes on the mainland and members of a mysterious native priestly class known to the Romans as Druids. The Romans would have known well the stories and tales told by their elders about the Druids. Julius Caesar's account of them in Gaul would have left a strong impression on the Roman people. Caesar writes of the Gallic tribes regularly appeasing their gods by making human sacrifices, which would not take place without the presence of a Druid. The Druids were philosophers, judges, keepers of natural and celestial knowledge, and acted as intermediaries between the gods and humans amongst the Celtic society. Caesar tells us, however, that the Druids were exempt from military service, but they were an integral part of the force that stood in opposition to the invading Roman army on the banks of the Menai Strait in AD 60. The Roman historian Tacitus tells us that the Roman soldiers standing on the banks witnessed an opposing army with a dense array of armed warriors. Tacitus describes women dashing between the ranks of men dressed all in black with dishevelled hair, conjuring up imagery of the Furies, suggesting to the Romans an otherworldly influence. Tacitus describes the scene. All around, the Druids lifting up their hands to heaven and pouring forth dreadful imprecations scared our soldiers by the unfamiliar sight, so that, as if their limbs were paralysed, they stood motionless and exposed to wounds. Frozen with fear at the sight that stood before them, the Roman soldiers were urged out of their stupor by a rallying cry from their general. Tacitus tells us they bore the standard on, smiting all resistance. The general Paulinus had flat-bottomed boats built to cope with the shallow waters of the Menai Strait, and once ashore, the Roman force burned the villages on Anglesey and the Druid sacred groves, which were, according to Tacitus, devoted to inhuman superstition, where they decreed it a duty to cover their altars with the blood of their captives and to consult their deities through human entrails. It is interesting that no sacred groves have yet been discovered on Anglesey.
So according to the Roman scholars, these altars were used for human sacrifice, yet there is no evidence of any altars at all, anywhere. Does it sound familiar? Does it remind you of the Native Americans being savages, even though there's absolutely no evidence of that? The Druids have been an interesting topic for me, especially after reading Acts 29. And yes, there is an Acts 29. They just took it out of the King James Version of the Bible so that you didn't understand that Paul went to Great Britain, Gaul, and Ireland, the same places the Druids were. Let's check it out.
And at evening, the Holy Ghost fell upon Paul, and he prophesied, saying, Behold, in the last days, the God of peace shall dwell in the cities, and the inhabitants thereof shall be numbered. And in the 7th numbering of the people, their eyes shall be opened, and the glory of their inheritance shine forth before them. The nations shall come up to worship on the mount, and testifieth of the patience and longsuffering of a servant of the Lord. And in the latter days, new tidings of the gospel shall issue forth out of Jerusalem, and the hearts of the people shall rejoice, and behold, fountains shall be opened, and there shall be no more plague. In those days, there shall be wars and rumors of war, and a king shall rise up, and his sword shall be for the healing of the nations, and his peacemaking shall abide, and the glory of his kingdom, a wonder among princes. And it came to pass that certain of the Druids came unto Paul privately, and showed, by their rites and ceremonies, they were descended from the Jews which escaped from bondage in the land of Egypt. And the apostle believed these things, and he gave them the kiss of peace. And Paul abode in his lodgings 3 months, confirming in the faith and preaching Christ continually.
So as we can see here, the ancient Druids, before they were Hellenized, were the expelled Jews, the expelled Israelites, and Paul confirmed it. You may be wondering why I'm even speaking about the Druids. Well, we have Halloween popping up, and this is just part 1 to probably several videos I'm going to have to do. So for the moment, I just want to concentrate on who the Druids were and some of their practices and beliefs. Eat the meat and spit out the bones. We know all things have been tampered with, but you can find the truth in it if you use the Spirit.
Throughout Gaul, there are 2 classes of persons of definite account and dignity. As for the common folk, they are treated almost as slaves, venturing naught of themselves, never taken into counsel. The more part of them, oppressed as they are either by debt or by the heavy weight of tribute, or by the wrongdoing of the more powerful men, commit themselves in slavery to the nobles who have, in fact, the same rights over them as masters over slaves. Of the 2 classes above mentioned, one consists of Druids, the others of knights. The former are concerned with divine worship, the due performance of sacrifices, public and private, and the interpretation of ritual questions. A great number of young men gather around them for the sake of instruction and hold them in great honour. In fact, it is they who decide in almost all disputes, public and private, and if any crime has been committed, or murder done, or there is any disposes about succession or boundaries, they also decide it, determining rewards and penalties.
So all in all, they had divine wisdom to judge righteously, right?
If any person or people does not abide by their decision, they ban such from sacrifice, which is their heaviest penalty. Those that are so banned are reckoned as impious and criminal. All men move out of their path and shun their approach and conversation for fear they might get some harm from their contact, and no justice is done if they seek it. No distinction falls to their share. Of all these Druids, one is chief, who has the highest authority among them. At his death, either any other that is preeminent in position succeeds, or if there be several of equal standing, they strive for the primacy by the vote of the Druids, or sometimes even with armed force. These Druids, at a certain time of the year, meet within the borders of the Carnutes, whose territory is reckoned as the centre of all Gaul, and sit in conclave in a consecrated spot. Thither assemble from every side all that have disputes, and they obey the decisions and judgments of the Druids. It is believed that their rule of life was discovered in Britain and transferred thence to Gaul, and today those who would study the subject more accurately journey, as a rule, to Britain to learn it.
Once again, the conquerors control the information. He who controls the information runs the nation.
The Druids usually hold aloof from war and do not pay war taxes with the rest. They are excused from military service and exempt from all liabilities.
Sounds like paradise to me.
Tempted by these great rewards, many young men assemble their own motion to receive their training. Many are sent by parents and relatives. Report says that in the schools of the Druids they learn by heart a great number of verses, and therefore some persons remain 20 years under training.
The Druids are an interesting group of people. All of their history is virtually erased, eradicated from the world. No written documents, all oral tradition. Sounds like Josephus. Sounds like the expelled Israelites, whose heritage got eradicated from the face of the earth. You would think with the contributions to westernized society, we would learn more about the Druids, whether in schooling or just in the world. But their name and their influence is virtually silent all throughout, unless you are just looking for it yourself. Makes you think, huh? This is just part one of the basic overview of the Druids. In part two, we'll be speaking about Samhain or Halloween and breaking that down because it's vital. I'll also be showing you why I think Halloween is way more ancient than what we may believe. Until next time, shalom.